Hi, I'm Reese, and I read Shakespeare in the Bush by Bohannan. In this story, Laura travels to Nigeria and tries to tell the story of Hamlet to the Tiv people. She expects them to understand the story the same way she does because she believes Shakespeare's themes are universal. What ends up happening is the Tiv interpret the story completely different. Their interpretation was based on their own cultural beliefs and their view of the world. By the end, Bohannan realizes that what she thought were universal truths were actually not universal at all and shaped by culture. This story is a great example of how worldview impacts how we interpret meaning. Bohannan goes into this thinking that her understanding of Hamlet would be the same everywhere, but the Tiv have a totally different perspective. For example, when she explains that Hamlet's father's ghost appeared, they don't believe it's a spirit from the dead. Instead, they think it must be a witch or some sort of trick. That moment shows how deeply worldview shapes what we see as real or logical. One ethnocentric bias I noticed in the story was Bohannan's belief that her own Western way of understanding the world was the most rational one. She assumes everyone will see Shakespeare the same way she does, which reflects a Western idea that its literature represents universal human experience. As a Tiv questioned her assumption, she starts to realize that her version of the truth is culturally specific and not universal. This story challenges the idea that our own culture is normal or best very well. The example is that in Hamlet, Gertrude's quick remarriage after her husband's death is seen as immoral and wrong, but the Tiv see that behavior as completely appropriate. In their culture, a widow remarrying a family member is a way to protect their social stability. So Bohannan's moral judgment suddenly doesn't make sense in that context. It makes you reflect on how the things we take for granted as right or wrong are shaped by the world we grow up in. When I think about my own culture, one unique norm I think about is how much we value punctuality. Being on time is seen as respectful and professional, but someone from a culture that is more relationship oriented and more relaxed about time might see that as overly rigid. Their worldview might focus more on connection and conversation rather than the clock. Something small like that can be perceived differently depending on a cultural perspective. From Bohannan's experience, one best practice for cross-cultural communication is to listen with curiosity instead of judgment. When the Tiv people kept questioning her version of Hamlet, she could have insisted that they were wrong. Instead, she engaged and listened, and that allowed her to learn about their worldview as well as hers. That's a great reminder that in cross-cultural situations, we should try to understand before we try to explain. Being open-minded and asking questions instead of assuming your way is the right way can prevent a lot of misunderstanding. I experienced something similar my freshman year of college working on a group project with classmates from different cultural backgrounds. We all had very different communication styles. Some people were direct and critical during discussions, while others were quiet and avoided open disagreement because they thought that was going to be disrespectful. At first, this caused tension, like in Bohannan's story. We each thought the others were being rude. But once we talked about our expectations, we realized those differences came from our cultural values. It reminded me of how Bohannan and the Tiv were interpreting Hamlet through their own lenses, and neither one was considered right or wrong. The biggest lesson I took away from Shakespeare in a Bush is that worldview and perception shape how we understand everything, from literature and morality to just regular daily communication. There's no single correct way to see the world, but if we can accept that our perspective is just one of many, we can become better communicators and more empathetic people. Bohannan's experience shows that understanding across cultures starts with curiosity and not necessarily certainty. I really enjoyed this article. I thought it was very interesting, and yeah, thank you for listening.